If you saw the title and thumbnail of this video, you probably already have a pretty good idea regarding who it is about. Chris Curtis has always been a sore loser, and following his loss to Myktybek Orolbai this past weekend, it seems he has kept the exact same trend. But before we talk about now, we first need to go back to the earliest losses in his career to really uncover just how deep his whiny attitude goes. September 13th, 2014, Chris Curtis faces future UFC welterweight champion Belal Muhammad in Hoosier Fight Club. Muhammad pretty much the entire fight played around the outside of the octagon and landed range strikes, really controlling the distance, not allowing Chris Curtis to work within his preferred range. Because of this, Chris Curtis's frustration grew, and it was evident in the very first round that he was frustrated, following Muhammad around the octagon and pointing down multiple times, gesturing to Belal to stop moving away from him and throw down in the center of the octagon. The rest of the fight proved most of the same, especially in the third and final round, where Belal Muhammad landed a takedown, controlled, and beat up Chris for the entirety of the round, even bitch-slapping Curtis while controlling his back. Immediately following the loss, Curtis is seen jumping to his feet, seemingly charging at Muhammad before the ref steps in between. Unintentionally, during this, Chris struck the referee and continued to flip Muhammad off before having event staff step in between and calm him down. Now, I think we can all agree that when Nate Diaz flips off Donald Cerrone in the middle of their fight, it comes off as an absolute badass show of disrespect. But when you do it immediately after being beaten up and controlled for 3 rounds, it kind of tells a little bit of a different story and comes off as if you're being a whiny little bitch. This is only the first instance publicly available of Curtis getting whiny and complaining about losing in an MMA fight, but there is many more, and they get even worse. But first, Chris would go on to win 8 of his next 9 pro MMA fights and was given a chance at a UFC contract in a fight versus Sean Laley on Dana White Contender Series in 2018. Looking back at this card, it was absolutely stacked for a Contender Series fight night. We had guys like Alonzo Menifield, Greg Hardy, Austin Lane, Montel Jackson, and even Kevin Holland, who all ended up being in the UFC at some point in their careers. In this fight, Chris would put on an incredible performance, landing a spinning hook kick in the third round, dropping Sean Laley badly, where Chris would finish the fight via ground and pound. Like anybody, Chris was fully expecting a contract into the UFC following this highlight reel finish, but unfortunately for him, he was not chosen. Basically threatening his professional MMA career, Chris put out this statement, "I honestly really probably will not pursue training. I'm kind of okay with walking away from everything. I just want to make a clean break with it. Like if I keep training, then you know I leave the door open for finding a reason to come back. I've trained full time for the last 8 years, so I guess I can go back to school, go get a real job, be a real adult. I don't really know yet, but I made a decent amount of money on the show, so it gives me a little time to figure out everything, get my ducks in a row, figure out what I want to do. If I'm going to walk away from it, it has to be completely, because I've seen too many people try to make that comeback and it never ends well." This was the first of many whiny statements that Chris Curtis would put out after a losing fight. Regardless, Chris would continue his streak and end up 11-1 in professional MMA since his loss to Belal Muhammad. He would then join the PFL, where he would unfortunately lose back-to-back fights to Magomed Karamov, both of them by unanimous decision. But it was following the second loss in the quarterfinals of the PFL welterweight tournament where we saw Curtis literally remove his gloves, place them in the center of the octagon, and leave them there, indicating his retirement from the sport. For the first time. And that literally only lasted 90 minutes. That's right, 90 minutes of retirement. Chris Curtis found himself back in the octagon as Magomed was forced to withdraw from his semifinal bout against Ray Cooper III due to illness. This gave Curtis the opportunity to fight as his replacement in the semifinal of the tournament. Also, I just want to quickly point out, because Sean Strickland was in Chris Curtis's corner for these two fights, but look at this guy's outfit. He's literally rocking flip-flops ringside, cornering Chris Curtis for this fight. Unbelievable. Anyway, this fight probably went exactly as you would have expected it to for somebody who just completely mentally checked themselves out of the sport. Chris Curtis got brutally knocked out in the second round. And after being brutally knocked out in round 2, Chris Curtis once again, in the same night, announced his retirement from MMA. Literally retiring 2 times in a single night. I mean, we thought John Jones and Conor McGregor were brutal and annoying for hinting their return to MMA after retiring, but doing it twice in one night is something I don't think we'll ever see again. And the second retirement lasted just over 3 months. And Chris was back in the octagon once again. But he would take a year off and eventually put up an impressive 5-win streak before Chris finally got a lucky draw of the stick and found himself a short notice replacement fight against rising UFC prospect Phil Hawes. Chris would brutally KO Hawes in round 1, finally securing his spot in the UFC, where he would go on to win his next 2 fights against Brendan Allen and Rodolfo Vieiro, giving himself a 3-fight win streak in the UFC. But we were not done with the whiny Chris Curtis of the past, because in his next UFC fight, he was matched up against Jack Hermansson, and almost exactly the same as his loss to Belal Muhammad 8 years ago, Hermansson won the fight by fighting along the outside of the octagon, landing the rangy strikes on Chris for the entirety of the fight. Well, Chris, being unable to take responsibility for his lack of an ability to get the fight to where he could find success, threw up the double bird to Hermansson in the dying seconds of the 3rd round. Being booed horribly by the London crowd, Chris doubled down on this, and as he was leaving the octagon, getting booed out of the arena, Chris threw up the double bird once again to the entirety of the crowd. After the fight, Chris took to Twitter to release his whiny rage with the following statement: "What a fucking waste of everyone's time. Sorry, London, I tried. Should have prepped for a track meet instead." In this tweet, Chris is basically hinting that Hermansson ran away from him the entire fight, but in reality, Chris just had to find a different way to win the fight and was unable to do so. In the next loss Chris Curtis couldn't accept, he faced Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum was making his return to the octagon after a 2-year layoff and was the slight favorite against Curtis going into this fight, but after a brutal flash clash of heads that was entirely missed by the referee, the commentating crew, and even potentially the judges, Curtis was knocked to his knees and took big ground and pound shots on the ground from Gastelum. This potentially swung the scoring towards Gastelum for that round, costing Curtis the fight. Curtis lost by unanimous decision, and honestly, I personally thought he could have won that fight based on damage, even with the head clash included, but he immediately took to Twitter to say this: "First off all, I'm seriously fucking tired of hearing the better guy won, or he's the better fighter. You all seriously don't know a damn thing about fighting. I don't care who you are or what you think you saw. The better man did not win, and the shit needs to be addressed. He gets moved to rank 11 for that bullshit when I for sure wouldn't have. Just proves it's about the story of Kelvin is back. What a fucking joke." Curtis would end up attempting to appeal the decision with the Florida State Athletic Commission, turning the decision loss to a no contest due to the clash of heads that was missed, but unfortunately for Curtis, the fight would not get overturned. And his string of bad luck did not stop here. Following this loss, it only got worse for Chris. In his next fight, he was largely being dominated by Nassourdine Imavov before suffering another brutal head clash in round 2, which ended the fight in a no contest. Now, many people were outraged, saying Curtis quit, But honestly, you can be the judge of that. In reality, the only person who knows the truth is Chris Curtis himself. It was also leading up to the Imavov fight where we saw Chris Curtis complaining about being the prelim headliner. In a now deleted tweet, he basically said that he was unhappy being on the prelims and that he deserved a spot on the main card. Small, but it's just another thing that Chris Curtis finds to whine about. In his next fight versus Brendan Allen, he would pop his hamstring in round 2 and actually fully tear it in round 5. Because of this, Allen was able to land big, damaging shots along the cage in the dying seconds of the round while Chris Curtis attended to the pain in his hamstring. Ultimately, this more than likely swung the round for Allen on Judge Derek Clearly's scorecard and lost Chris Curtis the fight. But it did not stop there, because next he was matched up against rising contender Roman Kopylov. It was a close fight with Kopylov until the dying seconds of the third round, where Kopylov landed a big head kick, wobbling Chris badly and dropping him to his knees, where Mark Smith ultimately called the fight in the last second of the round. Now, this could have been much, much worse, but Curtis was down on all 3 judges' scorecards regardless of the stoppage in the last second, so he would have lost this fight regardless. But it was after this fight we saw the first little glimpse of accountability from Curtis when he made this statement. Only job in the world where you can make $200K in a night and still be absolutely heartbroken and questioning where you go from here. No damage, I'm fine, probably train tomorrow for my sanity, but just frustrated and heartbroken. 8 months off, hamstring tear, broken foot, and then a calf tear. Trained through it all, never lost sight of the goal, just hurts to come up short. Thank you to everyone who reached out. Have had a lot of love online and in person. It means the world to me. I guess I should take some comfort in fight of the night, but I only view tonight as a failure. Now, I will say, this still comes off a little bit whiny, but we can forgive him with all the bad luck he had experienced up until this point, and it was an incredibly disappointing loss for him. Nonetheless, this glimpse of accountability did not last long. As we just saw this past weekend, Chris Curtis was matched up against Myktybek Orolbai, where he was controlled and completely dominated for 3 rounds, losing a 30-27 unanimous decision, and immediately jumped to X to cycle on back with his whiny, crybaby ways. Chris said this: "Well, that was as fun as a wet fart in church. Sorry, guys. Physical therapy went well. My knee held up. I had a great camp. No excuses. Just a shit night and a shit fight. Man had really good grip strength, and it's incredibly hard to fight a man that has no intention of being in a fight. Got some thinking to do and some stuff to figure out. But I walked out with no physical damage at all, just my pride really hurt. Thanks for the love and support. We'll see where we go from here." Now, it's almost a reoccurring trend that Chris Curtis threatens retirement after every loss, and seemingly he kind of hinted at it in this tweet as well. At the end of the day, sometimes it is luck, sometimes it is just being whiny. I think Chris Curtis has had a big mixture of both, but still, it is very evident that time and time again, Chris does the exact same thing over and over, unable to accept his losses in the UFC. This, in my opinion, makes him one of the whiniest, if not the whiniest, sorest loser in UFC history.